So starting with O-Calc Pro 5.0, there's the ability to create custom plugins and also custom reports, but in this video we're going to talk about custom plugins to allow you to add functionality to O-Calc to do tasks within the workflow of your organization and to make O-Calc more useful for interacting with other data types, for maybe providing tools that you wish it had that it doesn't come with out of the box. So let's take a look at what's involved in doing that. If you contact your Osmos representative, they can send you, it is not included by default, a pair of template files. Where those are placed, first you install Visual Studio 2012, and it can be the Express edition on your machine. And then in your Documents folder, you go down to where you find Visual Studio 2012, and you go to Templates, Project Templates, add a folder called O-Calc Pro, and in it place these two zip files, O-Calc Pro plugin.zip and O-Calc Pro reports.zip. Now, the next time you run Visual Studio on a machine with O-Calc Pro installed, what will happen is, so let's go ahead and do that. And let me shrink this down so we can see it. If I go to New Project, under my Visual C# area, you will in fact see O-Calc Pro, and in there you'll see two folders, O-Calc Pro Plugin, O-Calc Pro Report. So let's go and just make a real simple and sort of hello world, the traditional introduction to things. Now, actually creating plugins requires fairly intimate knowledge of A, the task you're trying to perform, and B, the internal class structure and data structure of O-Calc. All of this is documented, and all this documentation is available to you from your Osmos representative. But I would strongly encourage you to also request maybe getting some training. We have a couple of one-day courses that we can provide that really will jumpstart you in doing that. But let's assume that you just want to do the basic. I'm going to say hello, like that. I'm going to say OK. It cooks for a second, and it goes ahead and, exactly as you expect, makes a project for me. And it's called hello, and it has exactly one .cs file, which is the file that defines a plugin in O-Calc land. So let's take a look at what's involved in that. I'm going to open this up, and there are three types of plugins. You can have a dock tab, which can be docked in your O-Calc. You can have a simple menu item. You can have a plugin that does both. This fourth type, called Clearance Sag Provider, is much more complex. It's used for providing extremely complicated clearance rules for those that want to do clearance analysis, but we're going to skip that one for the time being. Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to say is, what type do I have? And by default it comes up as both, but I'm going to just do a simple menu item, and so I'm going to call it a dock tab. You'll notice IntelliSense is completely hooked up, as you'd expect. Then it says, what's the name going to be? We'll leave the name as hello, since we don't really care. What's the description? We'll make the description the same as the name. Now, it actually populated this add form method, but since we're going to make it a menu item only, we don't have to worry about that, so we can just go ahead and comment this out. It won't hurt anything. And now here's the place where it's going to actually hook up the menu item that we asked it to hook up. And so you'll notice what it does is here's the method, add to menu. The first thing it does is it creates a tool strip menu item button. Now this could just as easily be any other type of control, but so you can make your own menus that have many items on them, but we're just going to make a single button. We're going to add it to an existing menu. And then you'll see the next thing it does is it iterates through the tool strip that was passed in, which is by definition the tool strip on O-Calc Pro, and it's going to go ahead and let you say, okay, let me find the file menu. Now the reason you have to do it this way instead of using a static index is there might be other plugins that might have manipulated the tool strip in some other way, in which case we want to make sure that the place that we're putting this is on the menu we really intended. So let's do it by name. So we find the file menu, we put a separator at the bottom, and we put ourselves at the bottom of that. And then finally we hook up a my parent being dropped down event handler, which you'll see that why that's done in a second. And you'll add a click handler. And just as easy as that, we've added our own menu item. So let's take a look at what this thing's going to do. Let's look at the drop down menu item first. What this thing does is it says, I want to make sure that this thing is only enabled if in fact there is a poll loaded in the system. So I don't want to be running this menu item if there isn't a poll. Now that may or may not be true, but in this case let's say it is. So this actually gives us our first introduction into the APIs that are available from O-Calc. So almost all of the APIs live in the main structure, which is called PPL main. And for those that are interested, PPL stands for Prometheus Poll Loading, which was the internal development name of O-Calc while it was being developed. So I call PPL main get main structure. It says, go ahead and get the main thing. If that thing turns out to be a poll, then I want this tool enabled. And so when my parent is dropped down, I check to see if there's a poll loaded. If there is, I set my enabled value to true and the menu item will turn on. And now if I click it, I'm going to call a method called do plugin operation. I happen to do it this way so that I don't make my event handlers be too big and unwieldy, but you could just as easily have implemented this right in the event handler. And I do plugin operation. It's going to pop up a message box and it's going to say hello world. Couldn't be much simpler than that. Also not very useful, but we'll do something a little more useful later on. So the next thing I need to do is to look at how does this get deployed. Now the heavy lifting of actually taking the .dll file that this creates, renaming it to the PPL-UGIN file extension, copying it into the correct location of the O-Calc binary folder, and hooking it up in the registry is done for you. If we look at Solution Explorer and I go to my properties, and I go look to my build events, and you'll see that custom build events were populated for you by the template that we installed in our templates folder earlier. And you see the first thing it does is it renames the DLL to PPL-UGIN. It copies it to the right location, and it tells the registry that we want to run it. So the only thing that we need to do is to make sure that when I actually perform a debug operation, rather than running this, which isn't going to work because it's just a DLL, I need to actually run O-Calc. So I click Start External Program. I browse over to where I have O-Calc installed, which is going to be Program Files x86. It's going to be Osmos, O-Calc Pro, bin, and I'm going to pick ppl.exe. I'm going to select it. Now we're all set to go. So when I click Start, we then look under our file and we see that in fact our hello is there, and you notice it's even grayed out because in fact the poll is not loaded. And so we can put a breakpoint. Let's go back to our source code here and go down to this drop down opened method, right? And we can actually put breakpoints in our plugins, so they're fairly easy to debug. And if I click File, you see the drop down method fired, and so that the file menu is dropping down. I can go ahead and step through here. It's PPL main is not null, which let's hope it's not, but it's always good to test because you don't want your code to crash the system. Enabled ends up being false because get main structure is null, so it's not a poll, and so off we go. So and somehow or other I have managed to lock up my debugger because it doesn't like running under screen capture mode, but that's all right. So take this breakpoint out of here. Let's go ahead and hook it up and let's actually do it for real. I fire up again. It goes and runs O-Calc. My menu's here. I'll load up a poll. Now once this pole is loaded and it's calculated, you notice my method lights up and I can click that and it says hello world. Not very helpful, but you know, at least it's something. So let's make it do something sort of semi-real. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll close this down and let's make it actually tell us something about this pole. So that way, let's go down here. Instead of just saying hello world, let's maybe have it tell us what the pole's length is and maybe what its pole ID is. Okay, so very similar to what I did up above, I say if PBL main is not equal to null. Again, we're just doing that for safety's sake. And it's even better if you can actually type properly and so it's not equal to, instead of not minus. Then I can say PBL main dot get main structure. Now get main structure always returns a PPL pole. Now that's the base class of all poles. So if I say PPL pole equals get main structure, now we know that that thing wouldn't have turned on if this wasn't a pole. But let's just be safe here and we'll say so if pole is not equal to null, then we can do something with it. So let's say I want to say that the pole, instead of showing hello world, I'm going to say pole dot length in inches. Now notice that the method is called length in inches. So under the covers, and you will see this in the documentation, all of the units in O-Calc are in fact normalized. Everything is in inches. It's only at the edges that it displays it in any other units. So if you have it in meters, it converts it to meters when it displays it. It converts it to meters when you type it in, or from meters when you type it in, and it converts it to feet if that's in fact the units. And you can tell what it's going to do by looking at the documentation for the class structure, and this document is available to you, but we're going to go ahead and pull it up here. So I'm going to go to temp, which is where it got put, and I've got a lot of stuff in here. Star schema, and here's my schema file. And let me shrink this down so we can all see it. And so it tells me for every type of object, so here's the load case object, what are all the attributes, what is their type, and what is their display type. So let's find in here, and how does one find something? Haven't been a while since I used a PDF view. Sorry about that, kind of sad. So I'm going to look at pole let's look at wood pole. And so here we have the wood pole class, which is in fact derived from the pole class. And we're going to want to see what length was. And so length in inches actually has, if you say under displayed units, store as inches, display as feet or meters. So when you look at it in a report, or when you look at it on screen, or when you type in a value, it's going to be in feet or meters depending on what mode you have the device in. But under the covers, it's always in inches. And so you need to make sure that if you're writing a plugin, you're handling the correct units. So let's go back after that. So say we want to do this in feet. So we want to do this divided by 12. We want to say length is plus convert to string plus feet. All right, so it would be even better if we spelled the word length correctly. And now we're going to go ahead and run. And remember, we don't have to do any worrying about deployment. The template's already going to do that for us. So it's going to convert it. It's going to shove it over there. We've already told it that we want to fire up O-Calc whenever we do this. So it's going to fire up O-Calc. Remember, again, we have to load our pole. And now, if I say there, click my hello button, it tells me the length is 40 feet. So this is a 40-foot pole. If I wanted to know the above ground length, let's do something a little bit more complicated. All right. So this is getting out of hand. So let's say string message equals message, and now we're going to say, oh, message, oops, message plus equals environment dot new line, and we'll say setting depth is, we're going to cut and paste from above, and then we're going to say pole dot setting and see it, setting depth. Setting depth will also be in inches, so we want to convert that to feet. And so setting, boy, my spelling is atrocious today. And finally, so pole, so length above ground line is, and we'll say length in inches minus setting depth, the quantity, so slightly more useful. Let's go ahead and run that. Pull back again and pull up our tool, and it says length is 40 feet. Now you'd probably want to truncate this to only a couple places after decimal point, but setting depth is in this particular case 3 feet, which is a little weird, and length above the ground line is 37 feet. So you can see, you can, and of course you can set these same numbers and these same parameters and so on and so forth, but this is just a very simple introduction. So the amount of power that you have with these plugins is actually pretty extreme. You can do practically anything, including create entire new poles from scratch, save them to and from databases instead of from the file system, intercept operations and disallow certain types of edits within your organization, or even monitor edit operations and then cause like data in another data source or another database to be kept in sync. So there's all sorts of things you can do. There's practically no limit to what a plugin can do within this architecture. Again, it takes a bit of understanding of the schema and the architecture of the system to do that, but we are more than happy to help anybody who wants to make plugins to try to make O-Calc more useful within our organization to do that thing. Please don't hesitate to call your O-Calc Pro representative, and they'll get you in touch with the development staff, and we will help you in any way that we can to either talk about the viability of a particular plugin or to actually develop a plugin. Thank you.